Hi, I'm Keith Weinhold. This is Get Rich Education. By the government's own admission, inflation is now between 5 and 8%. Most people think that the real rate is higher. We're going to talk about how you can avoid getting crushed. By the end of this video, you are going to have 5 different key ways on how to not just protect yourself from inflation, but actually profit from inflation. Let's talk about how important this is. First of all, inflation means the diminished purchasing power of your dollar. Just this week, CPI inflation came in at 5.4%. That means the consumer price index, the price that you pay for everyday consumer items on the shelf. Also this week, the PPI, the producer price index, which is how much it costs producers to make stuff, that came in hot at a 7.8% year-over-year increase. And this is key because when it costs producers more to make stuff, then often months down the road, they need to pass that on to the consumer. Therefore, high PPI, 7.8%, could mean higher CPI down the road. Hot inflation keeps on making your dollar melt like an ice cube in your hand, as I'm fond of saying. Hey, put a YouTube like on this video if you like some of this content. Beyond these official government inflation temperatures, if you want to call it that, look, we have a recipe for even more future inflation. We had a strong jobs report come in. We just had a $1 trillion infrastructure bill passed, and now they're thinking about passing another $3.5 trillion budget plan for all kinds of other social programs. It's almost like an FDR New Deal style of plan, and though it's not the New Deal, it is a big deal. So this economy is getting awash in all these dollars that we're printing, and with each successive one that is printed, well, now the dollars that you already have are diminished in purchasing power because there are more dollars out there. And by the way, you notice how America has subtly switched spending plan amounts from having a little B next to the dollar sign for billion to now you're getting used to seeing a little T next to the dollar sign for trillion. That's 3 orders of magnitude in more spending. This impoverishes savers and consumers and lenders too. It trickles down to making the everyday person poorer when they see the price of their Chick-fil-A sandwich increase from, say, $3.69 to $4.09. Most people don't know how to get on top of inflation, so they get crushed by it this way. We are printing money like crazy. Just last year alone, depending on how you slice it, 1/3 of all the dollars ever put into existence were printed. Yeah, just last year. But now one thing you'd surely never hear is a government official admitting to all this, right? Like the person in charge of the Fed that orders the Treasury to create more dollars. They would never admit to rampant dollar printing, right? Or would he?
Yes.
This is Chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, last year on the show 60 Minutes.
Simply flooded the system with money.
Yes, we did. That's another way to think about it. We did.
Where does it come from? Do you just print it?
We print it digitally. So we as a central bank, we have the ability to create money digitally. And we do that by buying treasury bills or bonds or other government guaranteed securities. And that actually increases the money supply. We also print actual currency and we distribute that through the Federal Reserve Bank.
Did that really just happen? Did he actually say that? Yeah, he did. He basically said we just conjure up dollars out of thin air digitally and print it, just kind of whenever we feel like it and pretty much however much we want.
Yes.
Well, at least you got to give Jerome Powell a little credit for being transparent. You feel like he was telling the truth. He spoke it. Past Fed chairs like Alan Greenspan would just kind of get up there and mumble and use Fed speak, and you didn't know what he was saying, and you're trying to parse terms like what did he mean by moderate versus modest and all these weird sorts of things. At least Jerome Powell told us what he's doing, and you got to respond accordingly. Hey, put a YouTube like on this video if you like some of this content. Doesn't mean you have to like inflation. You can like the fact that we're going to talk about by the end of this video 5 actionable ways where you can get on top of inflation and actually profit from it. I'd really appreciate the YouTube like. That tells YouTube it's a good video. If a dollar is a token of the value that you have created through your work and through your risk-taking and through your ingenuity when you're working for an employer, and what you've taken time away from your family for, well, then he is debasing what you've worked for.
Yes, we did. that's another way to think about it.
That's the problem. Now let's go back to the time of the creation of the Federal Reserve around 1913, that area. In the United States, we didn't have a picture of a president on our currency until 1909. You can see the government getting more and more into the currency. Before that, pennies and other currencies, they featured a Native American or some sort of allegorical image. More and more government in your life. After Roosevelt was elected president in 1932, then the coins all began to feature past presidents. And of course, Roosevelt is the president that outlawed the ownership of gold in 1933, and that law lasted for decades. And of course, by the 1970s, tired of creditor nations asking to be repaid by the U.S. in gold rather than dollars, President Richard Nixon depegged the dollar from gold and said, we're just going to stiff you and only give you dollars now, even though that's not what we agreed to earlier.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold.
We are going to play a quick snippet of that Nixon speech from August 15th, 1971 here on the show on Monday when Rich Dad Poor Dad author Robert Kiyosaki joins me, and we're going to talk about the 50th anniversary of the fiat dollar then. In the 1970s and 1980s, the rate of inflation was often more than 10% a year. From 1974 to 1980, the value of gold shot up 385%. Partly that was because it took more weakened dollars to buy 1 ounce of gold. And that's a problem that we really didn't get on top of until we raised interest rates so high that mortgage interest rates topped out above 18% in 1981. You know, reading the work of Dr. Seyfuddin Ammous, he'll even tell you that the cheap processed food that began to show up on store shelves in the 1970s is the result of inflation, because consumers didn't want to think that they had to pay substantially more for food, or they would have even less faith if they thought that inflation was higher. So therefore, inflation is affecting the quality of the food that you're putting inside your body.
Yes, that's another way to think about it.
So you've got to understand that this stuff matters. Rampant inflation bastardizes the economy, and it trickles into all areas of your life that you never even imagined. Then, of course, to help stave off the Great Recession of 2009, the Federal Reserve pumped hundreds of billions, even trillions of dollars into the economy to try to help pave over that recession. Yes, that's what they called quantitative easing, a QE, a nice genteel term to think, oh, everything's just easy and we're just easing into this. No, that's rampant dollar printing that has the potential to diminish your quality of life. And by the way, I have grown a little tired of seeing these hyperbolic headlines about how hyperinflation is here. No, hyperinflation is not here. Economists agree that hyperinflation is an inflation rate of 50 to 100% per month. Yeah, that's right. I said per month. We're certainly not there. High inflation and hyperinflation are two very different things. So what can you actually do to protect your family? I've got 5 action items here for you. And in fact, one of them is almost going to make you laugh out loud. You're going to think, seriously? Really? That can protect me from inflation? Yeah, it can. It's something that you definitely wouldn't expect to hear. And I do have some specific websites, some specific resources that can help you here. The first one is, of course, my favorite, real estate debt is the best way to hedge yourself against inflation. In fact, I coined the term the inflation triple crown because you benefit 3 ways simultaneously. I'm not going to explain that because I've talked about that on the show recently. In fact, I have a great short 3-video course that's totally free for you to access right up here, the inflation triple crown. Debt on cash flowing real estate, that is the best way to not just hedge yourself against inflation, but profit from inflation. So then, is your favorite 4-letter word debt? Or is it loan? Which one of those two is it? You could get started with where I buy my own income property at greturnkey.com. Get pre-qualified for a loan and get connected with some property there. The second of 5 ways you can beat inflation is with Bitcoin. There is only ever going to be 21 million of them. That is a fixed supply. You certainly can't say that about dollars, where they're pumping out more all the time. One of the greatest misnomers that I hear about Bitcoin is someone says, well, I can't afford a Bitcoin because one costs tens of thousands of dollars. No, you can just get a tiny fraction of a Bitcoin. You can buy as little as $100 worth of Bitcoin, or probably even $20 worth of Bitcoin. You can start at Coinbase.com or another reputable crypto exchange. Bitcoin has a lot of pros and cons. One downside is that the price is volatile. You also likely are not going to get the type of cash flow that you get with real estate. And before you buy Bitcoin, understand that if you sell it or spend it and it went up in value, you are now subject to paying capital gains tax. The third way, gold, that is the classic inflation hedge. Gold is very liquid. It's had value for millennia. It's got virtually no chance of going to zero, but its price really only roughly tracks inflation over time. You have a light storage burden associated with it. When you buy, you have to pay a little over the spot price. When you sell it back, you're lucky to even get spot price again. But that's probably the best long-term classic inflation hedge. Gold is not going to make you wealthy, but you know what? Gold can prevent you from being financially wiped out better than almost anything I can think of. I bought gold at APMEX.com. APMEX, that stands for American Precious Metals Exchange. The fourth way that you can hedge yourself against inflation in a post-gold standard world that we're in here is going to make you laugh. This might make you laugh out loud. You might be saying, what are you talking about? Is that almost irresponsible? It's spending. Yeah, spending your money. That's how you beat inflation. If you want to spend $10,000 to go to Bora Bora this year, buy the trip and go this year. If you think it's going to cost $12,000 if you go ahead and buy it next year, you've improved your quality of life at the same time. And this one probably entails less learning than the other four inflation hedges. But indeed, the fourth way is spending. In fact, I wrote an article for Forbes about this and all the opportunities that you actually have in spending your money and how you're missing out by not spending your money. And I like to say around here, don't delay too much gratification in life. Sometimes delayed gratification becomes denied gratification. We focus on investing here first, produce before you can consume, so you can live better than you ever thought you could. Yeah, that actually entails spending. That's how you beat inflation. Hey, inflation makes savers losers. What's the opposite of saving? It's spending. The fifth of 5 ways that you can beat inflation is kind of a quirky one. You can stockpile necessities. Instead of putting $10,000 in the bank to be inflated away, go out and buy things like motor oil and light bulbs and ammunition and toilet paper and cigarettes and soap and dried beans. And as these things go up in price and you consume them, you don't have any sort of resultant tax on those things either, like you would with a lot of successful investments. I'm not going to do this one. I'm not going to have a bunker or have all these weird shelves and things down in my basement. This is just one that I'm not going to do. I do stockpile a little food, I guess, in a big pantry, but yeah, I'm really not going to be into doing any of this prepper sort of stuff. But it is a way to beat inflation. Those are the 5 ways. Real estate, which is the best, Bitcoin, gold, spending, or stockpiling necessities. The government really doesn't have to be in the dollar. They don't need to be the one issuing the currency, especially if we end up getting on a standard like Bitcoin. Every currency in the world that's administered by a government eventually goes to zero. The dollar is trending the same way. The government might do some things better than others, maybe police and fire protection, or maybe maintaining roads and bridges, or things like that. But if you want to get your money out of the dollar, these are some of those 5 ways. That's how you do it. That's how you beat inflation. Well, again, the big inflation milestone approaching is the 50th anniversary of the fiat dollar. That occurred August 15th, 1971. That's when Nixon announced it. August 16th, 1971 is when it actually became effective. So the 50th anniversary of that date, Monday the 16th, that's when Robert Kiyosaki will be here. That'll be the very next video here on this channel. We're going to talk about that 50th anniversary of the fiat dollar. He's going to take us a little bit of the time back into the 1970s and what he saw in the economy then. I am not old enough to remember. We're going to discuss how this, what's called the Nixon shock, changed the world, changed your financial future, and how a lot of people still behave like we're on the gold standard and like you need to save dollars in a bank, and how that's diminishing your prosperity. If you want to be sure to see that video with he and I, you need to do 2 things. When you subscribe, and I'd love to have you as a subscriber here over time on the Get Rich Education YouTube channel, also be sure to click the notification bell. That's how Mr. Kiyosaki and I will be delivered to you Monday. Thanks so much for being here. But as I like to say, you weren't here for me. You were here for you. I'm Keith Weinhold. We'll see you in the next video.